Good afternoon and welcome back. This is the fifth episode of the Digital Government Excellence Symposium presented to you by PayIt. This is the only educational series on the web for digital government service delivery leaders. If this is your first time joining and you missed the first 4 weeks of this event, you're in luck. You can watch the first 4 episodes featuring exceptional government leaders from cities, counties, and states across the nation on demand. You can access those links on the right-hand side of your screen in the Handouts tab. And with that, let's jump into today's event. I am pleased to introduce our special guest moderator who will help us drive a meaningful conversation today. Please welcome Reed Wilson, Chief Editor of Pluribus News. Reed is a former national correspondent for The Hill, and he is joining us from Washington, D.C. Reed, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Thanks, Nadia. Today, we're talking about effortless transformation, modernizing government service delivery in record time, backend upgrades not needed. Too often, governments find themselves outpaced by the speed of digital modernization. Technical complexities and old antiquated systems prevent governments from moving fast. And at the same time, consumers expect an Amazon-like experience. In today's episode, we'll explore faster paths for digital modernization. I'm going to be joined by 3 experts from the PayIt team: Katie Beth DeShepper, Vice President of Client Solutions at PayIt; Michael Gutierrez, Senior Director of Technical Operations at PayIt; and Jason Powell, PayIt's Director of Implementation. To tee up our discussion, let's turn it over to Katie Beth DeShepper, PayIt's Vice President of Client Engagement.
Thanks so much for setting this up, and I'm excited to be talking to you all about the topic of why we believe having a separate back end from a front end really allows you some flexibility to really remove friction for your residents to interact with you. And that's really why PayIt was founded. So PayIt, just a little bit about PayIt. PayIt was founded in 2013, really on the premise of it should be easy, just as easy as utilizing your favorite e-commerce platform, whether it be Amazon or whomever. It should be simple, because that's what we all expect. And the more you make things simple for people, the more likely they are to do it. And I think all of us know that. At least I know when I put my shoes out for my kids to get ready for school, they're more likely to get it done versus mom doing it. PayIt supports all levels of government, whether it's cities across services such as parking, property taxes, utilities, courts. Those are also things that are served at a county level. And then, of course, we also expand our service offering at the state level. So at the state level, we're serving DMVs, we're serving DHHS, so lots of different applications. And what's unique about PayIt is the way that we've really focused our platform development is putting the resident at the center. And that allows us to have the flexibility to go across these different verticals. And matter of fact, our platform allows a resident of a city, such as Kansas City, Kansas, which is part of a county, Wyandotte County, which is, of course, in a state, and that citizen can do services across all 3 of those jurisdictions with one profile, one wallet on one platform. And that's what's really unique about PayIt. With that digital platform focused on the resident at the center, it allows us to see that simplicity delivered for our agencies as well as the citizens themselves. With that, we're able to deliver an 82% increase in online dollars collected across several clients. And with that, it really not only perpetuates the digital adoption, the transformation of that digital choice, but it also leads to, of course, a decrease in the manual processes that exist today, whether that is going through manual checks and sorting through the mail or the office traffic. We've seen a 40% decrease in office wait times for state level clients. And then, of course, we have a 50% increase then of agency revenue collected, which frankly leads to the ability for you as the agency to really be able to deliver the revenue for the services in which you're collecting. Quick story. So Jackson County, Missouri, which is where Kansas City, Missouri is located, they were able to fund their entire year in just 45 days of collected revenue. I don't know anybody else who's been able to do that. I mean, that's just such a cool story to say, hey, we funded our schools a year in advance because we move things online. Like, that's just a really cool thing to be able to talk about. And again, it's because we are thinking about the resident first. You know, if I put my agency hat on and I think about, okay, what are all the things I need to do within an agency? I'm going to think about my data rules. I'm going to think about my security, the processes, and what my foot traffic is looking like. And so it's really hard sometimes to take that hat off and think about what would I want to experience if I'm just trying to come in and be part of that foot traffic? Well, that's really what we've done here. So we've really taken that focus, instead of thinking about, oh, well, this is what I need to do because I am agency X and therefore I need to collect property taxes and you need to have this form and this form. And if you've moved, I need to see a utility bill, all that's important. But as a person, as Katie Beth, I am one person. I don't need to understand that I exist in all these different databases. I just know that you're my county or you're my city providing me my utility services and I pay property tax. So why don't you have access to my utility bill that says I moved? It's just kind of mind-boggling, which again is why everything is shifting to that resident first design, to move from that left center picture to that more right center picture, where it's really focused on the citizen or the resident is telling you, I've moved. Here's access to my utility, which is collected by a private entity. Let me upload that to you so that I can then pay for my property taxes or enable my utility because I have a bank statement that I want to send you. So it really changes how we think about the user being at the center, which frankly solves a lot of other problems that you may be talking about. You may be talking about, how can we see that one citizen view? Well, there's other ways to solve for it, whether it's creating a data warehouse, and then you think about how do you make sure that Katie Beth is Katie Beth across all of these different siloed databases, and who owns that information and what should be first, second, and third. I know all of you are probably nodding your heads thinking about, yep, all of those things have been discussed and no one has come up, or maybe some solutions have come up. But by putting the power of that interaction to the resident based off of what they need to do with you, it really starts to simplify a lot of those conversations. And the citizen's happy. There's the resident has less friction. You get your money faster. It's just a little bit easier. Doing that can be hard, which is why we are talking today around separating the front end from the back end. It's not unique for people to not be sure where to start. If you think about all of the different kind of pulls on your day, your time, your priority, your dollars, some of it's just keeping the lights on and keeping everybody coming in your office and getting what they need done. And it's hard to think about kind of the bigger picture, even though we know we need to do something about it. So there's, of course, lots of ways to approach modernization. It's one of those elephants that you got to eat one piece at a time, but where to begin? And North Carolina had the same question. So North Carolina has had they have several, as you could all imagine, mainframes across the state. Some of them are more modern than others. And then there are some that are just kind of big behemoths that do a great job being mainframes. And one of those is for the DMV. This should not be surprising. So for the DMV, they have a 45-year-old mainframe system that runs their vehicle registration process. And then they have a separate driver's license mainframe that runs all the stuff about your identity. And of course, they don't talk. And I'm sure all of you are smiling going, I know this story. But what North Carolina decided to do is they were like, for us to be able to focus on all the things that we have to focus on, we need some help. And so they elected to say, hey, you know what? Payments is not just payments anymore. It's the one time that we can interact with every single resident in a year, which of course the elected officials are always really curious to understand. So they said, hey, we're gonna separate these things. Like that way, if you think about a citizen's view, a resident's view, they don't really want to understand that there's a mainframe that's 45 years old and probably shouldn't know that, because then it's not going to really make their opinion of the DMV any better. But let's create a surprising and delightful front end experience that's separate. So that way, if there's something that we have to do in the mainframe, we can kind of just do it. And is there a way to make the experience not show kind of that side? I think about, I'm from Kansas, so it's kind of like, don't pay attention to the man behind the green curtain. Let the modernization effort of that mainframe chug along at the effort it should to make sure that everything's still keeping the lights on, so to speak. But can we separate that out so that the resident thinks, man, those guys have it right. It was so easy for me to go online and to do this awesome transaction. I mean, we get comments where it was like, this was surprisingly delightful. Who says that about paying taxes on a vehicle? Well, the citizens of North Carolina actually do. So with separating and making that choice, so that was their first choice. Hey, we're gonna have this partner come in, PayIt. We're gonna have this partner come in. We're gonna have them kind of create that experience that's frictionless, easy, simple, so that we can, when we modernize this mainframe that's 45 years old, we don't disrupt revenue coming in, which of course we started working with them in 2018. And so when the pandemic happened, we instantly had no concerns. Like the state was like, oh, thank goodness we had this plan, because they had no disruption in revenue coming in for this service. Now, there were other disruptions across other systems. Of course, I'm sure we all experienced that. But for this, which of course is a huge chunk of the budget for the state, there was no disruption. So today we've served over 2.8 billion in revenue collected. And of course, this is vehicles alone. We've of course, because of the way our platform works, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we've added a whole bunch of other things because we have 6 million accounts. So 6 million, which the state of North Carolina is about 9 million drivers today. So 2/3 of all the drivers in the state are utilizing this service, which then it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Can we add on? Can we think about what else would these people, if I change my driver's license, I'm changing an address. And so is there a way for someone else to understand that? Should we tell citizens, hey, it looks like you've moved. Here's the next thing you should be doing. That customer journey thing starts to kind of come to life a little bit. Of course, we already talked about the 40% decrease in wait times. And on average, we're doing about 3 million online transactions for license plate renewals in a year. And again, the reason we're doing this, and we've kind of talked about, the mainframe over here and that separation, right, between the two, it really allows this experience to kind of look like a swan or a duck on water. So to a resident, it's easy, it's clean, it looks fancy. I expect as an e-commerce user, everything else to be simple. And then I don't expect, because I used to have this expectation of government, I don't expect that to be easy, but it should be. And by creating this kind of layer of the top of the water, or the connective layer across all the government agencies, that allows the residents to see the things you want them to see, to have the experiences that you want them to have, and not be disrupted by the modernization efforts that need to occur. Because by separating these things and by starting from that vantage point, it allows you to start thinking about the art of the possible. So let's say we didn't do that. Let's say we didn't separate the front end from the back end. Then when we think about the back end only, we're going to start thinking about, okay, well, I need to think about all of the jobs that are running on a Sunday, and are they all running at the right time? And so then I need to make sure if I make a new change to a program, it's not going to disrupt the backend system running its daily cron job reports and all of, like, it becomes where all we're thinking about is keeping the lights on and not what can we do differently. So by making that separation, you kind of create two parallel paths of success, right? So you can think about, if you separate these two things, adaptive, you can be more adaptive to levy changes. You can be more adaptive to a single resident view. If you're only thinking about a back end and you don't separate these things, a single resident view just, I'll be honest, doesn't happen. It won't happen because your system of record probably doesn't include everything. And maybe you want it to, but you also know what that journey is going to look like. And so maybe 5 years later, we can do it. But if you separate it, you can do it now. And there's many agencies that are doing that today because they've made that choice. They can create one customer. They can allow them to do interagency dependent steps. I have to have my driver's license updated and then I can go turn on my water. Whatever those things are, they can have emergency notification. So it really creates the ability to have progress in parallel versus one or another type of a decision-making moment. So all of us understand software as a service. I don't think I need to explain it. It's basically that someone has created a platform that allows you to take best practices and implement them with your business processes in mind in an easy way. That's why we're able to have a fast implementation. So we've mentioned a couple of cities, including the city of Toronto in Canada, North Carolina, Kansas, lots of different levels of government. And that we're able to implement that experience and drive these outcomes that we discussed in a very short amount of time because our platform is software as a service. So we really focus in on your specific business rules and also provide best practices for common services that we see across North America. So our speed to implementation is honestly, we're averaging around 90 days. And I'll tell you, the first time that we implemented, and I've been at PayIt since 2016, I'm an early bird. And so I personally have implemented across cities and states and counties. And everybody looks at me like my hair's on fire when I say 90 days, but it can happen. And that's because you're separating the front end and the back end. You're utilizing something that's been purpose built to make it simple for residents. And it's running in a parallel path from your day-to-day operations. That's why it can happen so quickly.
Shipper, Vice President of Client Solutions at PayIt, Michael Gutierrez, Senior Director of Technical Operations at PayIt, and Jason Powell, PayIt's Director of Implementation. Katie Beth, I want to go back to you one more time. Give us the overview. How can government agencies lower costs by modernizing these digital operations?
Well, I mean, I think that there's so many ways to lower costs. And I think when someone takes the descriptive task of lowering costs, you can lower it to a point in which your service starts to erode. When you're modernizing these systems, whatever modern looks like for you, there's a way to think about, okay, how can I make things, and again, like make things more simple across a broader audience. So thinking about kind of high frequency transactions first makes complete sense. So how do I get the majority of the things that people need to do in a modern way, in a cost-effective way? And so that's the first thing to start with. A quick renewal, a no changes property tax payment, whatever those things are, get that done first, because then you have kind of that nice Pareto principle of an 80-20. I do 20% of the work to get 80% of the optimization done. I think online is a really easy way to think about cost reduction and yet be modern, because not only do you have the ability to do that 20% work for 80% of the audience, or even 5% work for 95% of the audience, you can do it in a really cost-effective way. Online is all about efficiency. There's lots of ways to approach it. There's lots of ways to fund it. But at the same time, it also speaks to all, which also, of course, erodes cost.
Mike, let me ask you the basic question here. Why shouldn't a government agency just go build one of these systems on their own?
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of categories that I'd like to go into for this question in particular. The first one would be cost. So we all know developing software in-house can have a significant expense tied to it. So there are things like hiring, training staff, purchasing equipment, maybe doing software licenses if you're deciding to use a third-party tool to help you leverage that. And maintaining that software over time will always have more costs associated with it. Expertise would be another factor that I would throw out there. Building software in-house requires a team of experienced developers with specialized skills in software development. Sometimes agencies don't have that expertise in-house. So that adds to the hiring costs, as I mentioned earlier, but also trying to find the right mix of people that they need to support this effort at the start of it, and then maintaining it going forward. Time is a big factor in this too. In today's modernization world, right, we want to go fast as possible, right? There's a need to be able to do that. And we tend to see agencies get stuck, having to take a lot of time to build a solution that will make sense. And it's a time-consuming process to be able to do that. Quality is another great example. Just because you're building software in-house doesn't mean you're going to get a quality product, right? There's investment that needs to be made to make sure that all of the things that you expect to have in a digital platform are there, and make sure you have the right investment to make sure that the quality of that product is there. The last thing I'll go into is support and maintenance. So obviously, there's a big development effort on the front end, but that doesn't stop there, right? There's going to be things like bug fixes that have to be done, security updates, feature enhancements, right? We're always going to want to evolve. So there's always going to be a stack of things that you're going to want to add on to that, which continuously evolves all of the other points that I mentioned earlier in that cycle.
Yeah, as somebody who operates a website, I know all about that part. Jason, I feel like one of the common themes that we've heard in a lot of these webinars is sort of internal resistance to this type of change. What are some of the challenges that government agencies are facing when they try to modernize? I'm wondering about resistance from elected officials, resistance from constituents who are going to use these systems.
Absolutely. And I've certainly got a few things that I want to talk through in terms of what we've seen in the market, but this certainly is not an exhaustive list. There are things beyond what I'll talk through, but some of what we see in our experience, first up is just the bureaucratic process as organizations and agencies look to implement or potentially modernize the stack, the data, the tools. There's a lot of individual groups or agencies who want to participate in that, and all for well-intentioned reasons, but sometimes that can slow down or potentially impede progress. I think second is the legacy integration to old systems. Katie Beth in her intro talked about server racks and rooms where old legacy monolithic architecture lives. And there's not always a clear path to how we get from today to the future. And that creates uncertainty and a challenge, of course, in modernizing. Third, I would say there are typically budget constraints. As we know, there's not unlimited amount of money for governments to go out and pursue every opportunity that they want. Ultimately, in business and in government, it's always about trade-offs and the decision to choose one thing over another. And the purse strings and the budget is where all of that really comes to a head in terms of decisions and where priorities need to be made. Fourth, I'd say there's also traditional processes. We experience and see organizations who have, for the last number of years, done the thing that helps get the process done. And sometimes technology and modernizing the solution and the tech stack causes a need for change management. But we have seen that, again, create challenges. And lastly, I'll say from, read your question about what residents potentially bring up in terms of challenges that they have is data security and privacy concerns. So thinking about how to manage a resident's information, their personally identifying information, especially when we think about taking payments for those individuals. How do we manage their credit card information, their bank information, and doing so in a secure way so that only the individuals who need to see that information have access to it? So those are a few challenges that we see. And like I said, everybody on this call likely feels and experiences these on a day-to-day basis and can likely add another dozen to what I've already laid out.
Yeah. So what are the strategies that you help your clients use to get over those who are skeptical of these new systems?
Absolutely. I think first up is really just about building a coalition of support. It typically starts with somebody who has an idea. Again, Katie Beth at the beginning of this call talked about making the art of the possible possible. And a lot of that begins with one or two individuals or a small agency or a small group of individuals who say, let's go make this better, and building a coalition of support. And so we talk a lot about building a stakeholder group, building buy-in, and really identifying champions who can help go have conversations with those that they work with, those who maybe are in departments that they interact with on a day-to-day basis, and can help to go, again, build support and kind of grow that coalition of support. I think second, we think about taking out specific concerns one at a time. So all of the challenges that I just mentioned, how do we address those and think about those when we talk about modernizing the stack, again, separating the front end from the back end and taking out kind of individual concerns at a time. The next is highlighting the benefits of moving forward with this type of modernization, while at the same time highlighting the potential net negative from not taking a modernization approach. There's going to be pros and cons to both of those. So making sure that we weigh and balance those appropriately. And then last up is providing case studies and examples of where it's worked and how, despite certain agencies not being exactly the same, state to state, city to city, county to county, there are a lot of parallels. And how do we build a roadmap to say, we've done this here, or you've done this here, let's go execute a similar kind of playbook with this group as well. So that's Reed, a couple things that we see as how to get buy-in and how to start to grow the momentum for modernization.
That's a good sort of lead into my next question, which may be a little selfish because we cover what happens in the states. I mean, a lot of the government agencies that we've heard from during the Digital Government Excellence Symposium have been local governments, Toronto, Beaufort County, South Carolina, places like that. What about state governments? What are they doing in the modernization process? And I'll throw that open to whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, so I'm happy to tackle that, Reed. I think there's so many different directions that states have taken. I mean, if you think about states, there's tons of agencies that do their own thing and have their own systems of record. And so I would say that it's very different in terms of approach. However, I think that it comes down to kind of two things. One, there's going to be some pieces of technology or processes that have to change. So I think about Real ID. That was not a choice. It was a must, right? Legislatively required. And so that's one of the things that has been a big focus, which created a lot of interstate checks and balances. When I move from Arizona to North Carolina, I have to create a new driver's license. Well, how does Arizona know I moved? How do they know my credential has changed? And so there's a lot of regulation that happened around Real ID to create some modernization in those processes so they could talk to each other, because that was a requirement. I think the other thing is we see states who kind of define their true north of what they want to focus their modernization efforts around. I do see that states are starting to lean into one citizen portal. How they're doing that are very different approaches. I think it depends on if you have a customer service reason in mind. So how can I have the best customer service? How can I deliver a consumer-driven model approach like e-commerce from a government? So for example, how can agencies make sure that they are serving all the audiences that they can? for DHHS services or any of those other kind of need-based services. Their job is to serve those who need them. How do you find them? How do you help them understand what's available? And that's where a citizen kind of focused portal or a citizen focused solution really starts to kind of shine as their true north, versus a technical true north, which might be like, well, we'll create a single sign-on and that's going to be a citizen. Well, a citizen doesn't care much about a single sign-on unless it benefits them. And one login is helpful, but it needs to do more than that.
Yeah. The subtitle of today's conversation is Backend Upgrades Not Needed. So let's get a little technical, Mike. Talk about the system itself and why should agencies consider separating that front end system and the back end system instead of trying to solve both at the same time?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. You would tend to think, well, hey, it'd be great to have one solution that supports all of it and put my eggs all in one basket. I think in reality, there's this notion where, a company has to specialize in what they do best. And a lot of these organizations, for example, if they are specialized in producing well-equipped back-end systems, they started that as their core, and then out of necessity, because they wanted to have a competitive advantage, started to build a front-end component so that they can be competitive in the marketplace with others that specialize in front ends. The challenge there is they don't have all of the expertise to do that well. So it ends up being a situation where they don't have all of the things that digital modernization customers are looking for. Maybe they don't have best-in-class ADA compliance. Maybe they don't have the best-in-class experience. And further, it also cannot be extended past the system of record that they support, right? So when we talk about digital modernization, Katie Beth mentioned this earlier, residents really want to have a singular experience to interact with multiple services. So you start to think about, okay, I've got this back office system that supports property taxes. I have this front end that allows me to collect payment and be able to do that. But now I need to be able to extend that to my utilities customers. Well, now I've got a disconnect because I have a different back end system that is supported there, and I cannot extend my front end portal from my property tax system to my utility system. So I have another front end that's supported for that. And now you have disparate systems that may have different logins. They may not be able to utilize the same tokenized payment across all of them. They don't have a singular place where they can manage all of their data and just perform that interaction in a consolidated manner and have that all work behind the scenes by themselves. This is where you go look for that front end that supports that ability to integrate with multiple back office systems, whether it's somebody that is a best-in-class SaaS solution back office provider, or a AS400 built mainframe system that's 25 years old that still works and they want to continue to utilize it. It doesn't matter. You have the ability to be able to create that singular experience for your resident and be able to have that interaction, but also make sure that everything behind the scenes can talk to each other in the way that it needs to, and everybody gets all the right data that they need.
Yeah. Jason, let me get your take on that. What sets separating the two systems apart from other solutions that a government might go after?
Yeah, the thing I turn back to is, what Katie Beth talked about with every city, state, county has their own reasons and their own motivations for wanting to modernize. And at the center of all of that is the resident. So when we think about this approach of doing a front end, back end modernization potentially independently, the key differentiator for us is always keeping the resident at the center of that experience. And when you have monolithic architecture with specific services, whether it's a city, a county, or a state service living independently from one another, that resident is then faced with the challenge of having to be serviced through those different channels in a separate application and a separate service. So really the big benefit for using this kind of two system approach is making sure that the resident has a great experience. And kind of piggybacking off of some of what Mike just talked about with the consideration of potentially separating and kind of solving challenges there, you also get greater flexibility and modularity with the solutions. So you can be more agile and respond to challenges more specifically. Certainly speed is part of that, but unique challenges across different services are always going to come up, and changes will always have to be made. And from a lens of a single tech stack versus being modular, that just creates a different dynamic that everyone has to work within depending on the approach taken.
Yeah. Are there any situations where it would make sense to keep the front end and back end systems together?
Yeah. So as much as we've talked about why we see the value in that, there are certainly good arguments to be made on the other side of that coin. I think the first is potential simplicity. Sometimes there are key systems that have to continue running for business continuity, for other reasons. And so keeping everything kind of in one system does create a bit of a streamlined process, creates resource efficiencies where your team doesn't have to manage potentially multiple applications at the same time, thereby reducing the amount of systems and tools that they have to know and have expertise in and administer. Also, you see reduced overhead as a possible positive outcome of kind of keeping systems together. Again, less hardware, less infrastructure, less resources from the team's perspective, having a single integrated system. And then the last one is, as you think about, as Mike talked about, the delivery and the kind of ongoing maintenance of tools, debugging and testing and potentially launching fixes after we go live can be quicker. So really just the debugging and testing efficiency that comes from possibly having one system. So those are a few that I would say as what we've seen be a positive note for keeping systems together.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for us today. My thanks to Katie Beth, Mike, and Jason. And now back to Nadia Davis. Nadia?
Thank you, Reed, so much. Thank you for coming to today's program. And Katie Beth, Mike, Jason, always a pleasure to have you guys. For our audience, let me remind you guys that next Wednesday, we will run the last episode for the 2023 Digital Government Excellence Symposium. And on that episode, we'll kind of bring everything together. So we've talked about what the trends are. We've talked about what best practices are. We've talked about the things that you need to keep in mind to drive digital transformation and make it meaningful for the residents. But now, how do you drive adoption? Say you've gotten to the point where you have something in place, but now it's your job to ensure that your residents across your city, county, or state are using it. How do you make the program successful? So make sure you're here next Wednesday at the same time to get those answers. We will have Chief Digital Engagement Officer for the City of Boston, as well as Director of User Experience for New Hampshire DIR and Department of Administrative Services for the state of Connecticut, presenting their view on this topic. So thank you again for joining PayIt. This was Digital Government Symposium, and I'll see you all next Wednesday. Thank you very much.